Order, order. Question one's been withdrawn, so the question is Chancellor of the Exchequer. I start with Nick Smith.
Question 2, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The £4.8 billion Levelling Up Fund will invest in local infrastructure that has a visible impact on communities across the United Kingdom. It has been jointly designed by Treasury, MHCLG and the Department for Transport.
Nick Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having waited so long, I really hope the Levelling Up Fund will boost infrastructure in South Wales. Now, I've already written to the Chancellor about the improvements that are needed for the Evervale to Cardiff line to help young people especially get to work. So can the Minister assure me that this investment will finally be seen through?
Well, I share the honourable member's desire both to boost infrastructure in South Wales, but also he's quite right to focus on young people getting to work, given how impacted they have been by the pandemic. He knows that his area in particular has received additional funding for capacity, and that will enable his area to then bid for the Levelling Up Fund to address the issues that he highlights.
Meg Hillier. Alan Brown. Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The existing fiscal framework sets out the arrangements for a review following the Scottish elections. This will allow an assessment in the light of a Parliament's worth of experience, and this is consistent with the Smith Commission's expectations that there will be an effective operation of the fiscal framework and that it should not require frequent ongoing negotiation.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and apologies. The reality is that the powers the Scottish Government have was not adequate to deal with the pandemic. There's too many constraints in borrowing powers for the Scottish Government. And the reality is councils can borrow easier under the Prudential Borrowing Code. So doesn't it agree it's time the Scottish Government had more flexible borrowing powers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course the Smith Commission set out the conditions, and that gives substantial borrowing powers already. That's why there is up to 450 million of annual capital borrowing, there's 700 million of the Scotland Reserve, and up to 600 million for resource borrowing in relation to forecast error. And of course that comes on top of the share of UK government borrowing provided through the Barnett formula.
Right, we have substantive questions to the Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'd like to answer this question together with question number 6. The Government is committed to supporting household living standards during this difficult time for our country. That is why we announced an unprecedented package of support to protect people's jobs and incomes and help those most in need.
Let's go to Drew Hendry. Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's approaching 2 years since his government said it would review the way dying people are treated through social security. Meanwhile, Marie Curie estimates that as many as 6,000 people have died waiting for a decision on their claims, along with many campaigners for change. His government have repeatedly promised that it intends to end the 6-month rule, currently forcing terminally ill people to prove how long they have left to live before they can access fast-track support. So can the Chancellor confirm that this long overdue reform will be in the Queen's speech?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it would be wrong for me to preempt the Queen's speech, of course. I know colleagues will understand that, but I can assure the honourable gentleman that my right honourable friend, the Work and Pension Secretary, keeps all these matters under review, and of course we want to make sure that our welfare system is compassionate and effectively supports those who need our help.
Let's go to John Littleson. John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My goodness, what a disastrous week for the UK government. Whilst it has been marred in scandal and slithering through sleaze, the SNP is committed to doubling the Scottish child payment and carers allowance and introducing a new winter heating payment. Does the Chancellor accept these are more noble social objectives than enriching well-placed cronies?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what I believe to be a more noble objective is to focusing on the day-to-day concerns of the Scottish people at this difficult time, which is making sure that the economy recovers, the vaccines are rolled out, and of course our children receive the education that they deserve. These are the issues that I know the Scottish people will care most about in the coming weeks.
Let's go to the Chancellor Committee. Mel Strife. Mel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Due to the increasing concentration of wealth in older generations, the value of the average inheritance received by younger generations is becoming significantly greater through time. Does my right honourable friend recognise this trend, and that it means that future living standards will become more and more determined not by skill, entrepreneurship, hard work, but by chance, with a detrimental impact on social mobility? And whilst it is absolutely right that families can pass on wealth to their loved ones, does my right honourable friend nonetheless recognise the strong trend here? And if so, what steps might he consider in order to address this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would say to my right honourable friend two things. One is he will know that in the budget we recently froze the inheritance tax thresholds for 4 years, which will provide some alleviation to the concern that he mentioned. But also the best way, I believe, Mr. Speaker, to drive social mobility in our society is to provide everyone with the skills and education they need to make a better life for themselves, and that's what this government is committed to delivering.
Let's go to SNP spokesperson Alison Thewlis. Alison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Tories' two-child limit and the rape clause, which stands part of it, is having a devastating impact on living standards, with the Child Poverty Action Group and the Church of England estimating that 350,000 families and 1.25 million children have been affected so far. Scrapping the two-child limit would be the easiest and most cost-effective way of reducing child poverty in the UK. So will this Chancellor scrap it, or will he push more families into poverty?
Well, Mr. Speaker, maybe I can say to the Honourable Lady that since 2010, over 1 million fewer people are now living in poverty, thanks to the actions of this government and the coalition, but also 300,000 fewer children are living in poverty, Mr. Speaker, and that is something to be celebrated. But of course there is work to do, and we remain committed to making those improvements.
Let's go back to Alison Thewlis. Alison.
It's interesting, Mr. Speaker, that he ignores the findings of the Church of England and the Child Poverty Action Group, who tell a very different story than he is willing to tell. And in Scotland, the SNP is committed to doubling the Scottish child payment, a new benefit described as a game changer, to £20 a week, providing free school meals to all primary children and extending wraparound childcare, all a huge help to the families this Tory government chooses to ignore. So doesn't this demonstrate the choice of two futures, more austerity and more child poverty under the Tories, or is Scotland working hard to be the best place for a child to grow up?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the Scottish Government are able to use the over £3.5 billion of Barnett consequentials that have been provided by the UK Government over next year. But with regard to child poverty, Mr. Speaker, this is, of course, an important issue and one which we remain committed to, which is why initiatives like the Troubled Families programme are making an enormous difference to those vulnerable families. But also, crucially, we know that children growing up in a workless household are 5 times more likely to be in poverty, which is why this government is committed to helping people find work and finding well-paid work, and that is something that we have an excellent record of doing.
Let's go to, substantive question to Minister Benn. Bridget Phillipson, I do apologise. Sorry, Shadow Minister Bridget Phillipson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. David Cameron said that Greensill had the mandate for the UK government. Greensill said that they were the sole provider of supply chain finance across government, with a model that brings several benefits to the UK public sector. Does the Chancellor still believe that he was right to bring in real terms pay cuts for public sector workers while allowing David Cameron and Lex Greensill to target their pay packets, giving them the run of Whitehall?
Well, Mr. Speaker, with regard to public sector pay, I do believe it is right at a time of extraordinary strain on our public finances, where those in the private sector have seen over 1 million jobs lost, hours cut, wages cut, many millions furloughed, with the impact that has on them. I do think it's right to take a fair and proportionate approach to public sector pay, which is why this government has said that those on the lowest pay will see a pay rise this year. Those in the NHS will see a pay rise as well. And combined with all the other pay progression means a majority of people in the public sector will see their pay increase this year, despite of the difficult circumstances. And of course, Mr. Speaker, the national living wage is also being increased ahead of inflation, making sure those on the lowest incomes do see an uplift in their take-home pay.
Substantive question to Minister Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, a number.
The Treasury is considering the merits of differentiating products based on their place of retail as part of its alcohol duty review. We are currently analysing responses provided by stakeholders to our recent call for evidence and will provide further updates in due course.
Go to Giles Watling. Giles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for her answer. But it's all very well conducting calls for evidence and creating reports, welcome that they may be. But we live in extraordinary times which require extraordinary measures taken quickly. I implore the Minister to press her department to act on this matter now. Hospitality in general and pubs in particular are facing closure every day. Will she act?
Mr. Speaker, I know the Honourable Gentleman is a fierce advocate of pubs and brewers, and he's been proposing a duty differential for several years. I should stress that I am personally very interested in this proposal, but there are a number of complex issues associated with it, including how producers and wholesalers would account for and manage their stock of beer, how to ensure any reduced rate is not exploited fraudulently, and how any differential would interact with the existing small brewers relief scheme. However, I'd like to reassure him that we are looking closely at the proposals that he has put forward.
Bob Seeley? If not, can the Chancellor answer the substantive question first?
Thank you. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to also answer a question 13 together with this. At budget, I announced the location of 8 free ports in 8 regions of England following a highly competitive process. The Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government are now leading a cross-government effort to support the winning bidders to establish their free port, and we expect the first free ports to open later this year.
Let's go to Paul Holmes. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend authored a report in 2017 which found that free ports could easily create up to 90,000 jobs if they were as successful as the US Foreign Trade Zone programme. Does my right honourable friend agree that by voting against our finance bill and setting up free ports earlier this month, such as the Solent free port near my constituency, the Labour Party have shown that they have no interest in creating jobs and levelling up opportunity across the country, as this government is committed to doing?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I congratulate everyone involved in the Solent Freeport bid. This government is using free ports to boost jobs, investment, trade and growth. Local communities from Merseyside to Teesside, Humber and indeed the Solent all agree with us, and it is a shame that the party opposite does not support their aspirations.
Stephen Kinnett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Steel is... Oh, excuse me, number 14, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, there are global challenges in the steel industry with vast overcapacity and supply outstripping demand. However, the government has supported the steel sector extensively, including providing over £500 million in recent years to help with the cost of energy. Our unprecedented package of COVID support is still available to the sector to protect jobs and ensure that producers have the right support during this challenging time.
Stephen Kinnock.
Steel is absolutely central in terms of good jobs, national security and combating climate change. There can be no post-pandemic economic recovery without a strong and healthy steel industry. Will the Chancellor therefore commit today to recognising the pivotal strategic importance of the steel industry by using the power of the Treasury to reduce the exorbitant electricity prices faced by our steelmakers, currently 82% higher than in Germany, so that our steel industry can compete on a level playing field?
I'd like to reassure the honourable gentleman that this is something that we are doing. As I mentioned in my answer earlier, we've already spent £500 million across the sector specifically for that point. Further, we are taking a number of steps to support the decarbonisation of the UK steel industry. For example, we announced the £250 million Clean Steel Fund to support the decarbonisation of the steel sector, including its transition to new low-carbon technologies and processes.
Come to Shadow Minister Bana Pongasari.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Jobs in the steel industry are crucial to the people of Hartlepool, and in June, the first instalment of the EU Research Fund for Coal and Steel will be returned to the UK. Is the government planning to ring-fence that money to support, decarbonise and modernise the industry, given the vital importance of protecting steel jobs for the future?
Minister. I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I mentioned already in my answer to the Honourable Gentleman about the steps that we're taking to decarbonise the UK steel industry. As I mentioned earlier, there are global challenges in the industry, and we have been supporting various companies. For example, last year we provided a £30 million loan to Celsa, safeguarding a key supplier to the UK construction industry and securing more than 1,000 jobs, including more than 800 positions at the company's main sites in South Wales. And the government will continue working with businesses to understand the issues they are facing, including continuing to engage business sectors that are affected by COVID and our changing relationship to the EU.
Greensill.
Number 16, sir.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to answer this question together with questions 17, 18 and 19. Our plan for jobs supports retraining and upskilling by tripling the number of traineeships, expanding sector-based work academies, incentivising apprenticeship hiring and providing funding for new, free, advanced technical courses and digital skills boot camps under the Lifetime Skills Guarantee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People across Birmingham Northfield remember only too well the impact that an economic shock can have on livelihoods and jobs in the community following the collapse of MG Rover many years ago. And so does my right honourable friend the Chancellor agree with me that it's because of things like the Lifetime Skills Guarantee, which is going to allow many adults to be able to train and retrain to get back into work so they have the security of a pay packet as we ease out of lockdown and we build back better following the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Across our nation, over 10 million adults don't have a level 3 qualification, and thanks to this government's Lifetime Skills Guarantee, they will now be able to get one. And we know what that will do. It will boost both their employability and their earnings, providing them, Mr. Speaker, with the opportunity of a better future.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No matter where in the country you are from, everyone should be able to get the experience and knowledge they need to get the job they want. Does my right honourable friend the Chancellor agree that the new flexi-job apprenticeships he announced last month will boost opportunity sectors key to Rother Valley, especially in high-end manufacturing, creating more chances for people to experience the life-changing opportunity an apprenticeship can bring?
Well, my honourable friend makes a really important point, and that's why we were delighted to announce at the budget a £7 million fund, Mr. Speaker, to create and expand flexi apprenticeship schemes, and those enable people who need to work across multiple projects with different employers to still benefit from the high-quality long-term training that an apprenticeship provides, and that's particularly important in the industries that he mentioned of high-end manufacturing, and I know this will make a difference in his constituency.
Let's go to Dr. Jamie Wallace. Jamie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Young people have been particularly affected by this pandemic, including in my Bridgend constituency. Can my right honourable friend outline for the House what support he is putting in place to support young people to get back into work and to boost opportunities?
My honourable friend is right to highlight the importance of our focus on young people. Over half of the jobs that have been lost since the start of the pandemic have been those under the age of 25, and their rates of furloughing are much higher than others, which is why, acting very early last year, we created the Kickstart programme, which is creating hundreds of thousands of jobs across the country, including in my honourable friend's constituency. I'd urge all members to talk to their local businesses to get them excited and joined up to the Kickstart scheme and provide young people with the chance of a brighter future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. SMEs are often referenced as the beating heart of the UK economy, employing the largest number of people. And certainly this is the case in my Dudley North constituency and across the West Midlands. So will my right honourable friend commit to work with colleagues in Department of Education, DWP and business to ensure that we improve engagement with small business, in particular in the design and funding of apprenticeship schemes, as they need providers to deliver much more at foundation level 2, but which the current funding framework is less able to deliver? This would help actually bring about the retraining revolution of our brilliant Mayor Andy Street talks about.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the brilliant Mayor Andy Street is right to talk about the retraining revolution that we need and that he is implementing in the West Midlands. But my honourable friend makes an important point about the flexibility of the system to support SMEs. And I'm pleased to tell him that we are implementing, starting this August, a new scheme to allow SMEs to link with larger levy-paying businesses through a new matching and levy transfer service that will help SMEs access that funding and provide those level 2 or 3 apprenticeships that he rightly identified as being important. And he should also know that that scheme was based on, I think, a pilot programme that was launched in the West Midlands.
We have a substantive question to Minister Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I would like to answer this question together with questions 21 and 22. Throughout the pandemic, the government has sought to support businesses across the UK, and to do this is put in place a package of economic support for businesses and individuals worth £352 billion since the start of the pandemic. The Office for Budget Responsibility and the Bank of England have highlighted that without this intervention, the UK economy would be significantly worse than it is today.
Let's go to Cheryl Murray. Cheryl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What additional financial assistance can my honourable friend give the all-important tourism sector in Cornwall to ensure it's fully ready to greet the G7 in June?
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question. Cornwall hosting the G7 is a fantastic opportunity, and I know that my honourable friend has welcomed this chance to showcase all that Cornwall has to offer. Many organisations in the broader tourism sector have benefited from business grants, with over 34 million provided to her constituency in South East Cornwall, as well as business rates, holidays and the temporary reduction in the rate of VAT. And MHCLG has recently announced the £56 million of Welcome Back Fund to support safe local trade and tourism as economies reopen.
Let's go to David Simmons. David.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for the answer and particularly welcome the support being offered in the form of extended business rate relief. Looking to the future and with reform of business rates in the pipeline, what discussions have taken place with BEI's colleagues about the potential to balance the need to secure the correct revenue to support vital local government services and boosting high streets like mine in Ruislip, Northern and Pinner through the reform of business rates?
Minister.
The honourable gentleman brings a great deal of expertise and experience to this matter, and the government have, though, committed to over 16 billion in business rate support for eligible retail, hospitality and leisure properties since April last year. When combined with small business rates relief, this means that 750,000 retail, hospitality and leisure properties in England will pay no business rates for the 15 months from the 1st of April last year. The government is, however, undertaking a fundamental review of the business rate system and invited stakeholders to contribute their views on ideas for reform. And I know the honourable gentleman will also be very pleased to see the 16.9 million of business grants that his constituents have received.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Warren Buffett once said that what we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. And with a 50% rise in the number of companies in significant financial distress, to prevent repeating the historic mistakes of post the last financial crisis, inflicting all that scandalous treatment on SMEs, would my honourable friend consider working with the banks to extend the very fair and sensible provisions of the pay-as-you-grow scheme from bounce-back loans and also transfer that into CBILS loans?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. The Treasury has, as he will know, amended the CBILS rules to allow lenders to extend loan terms from 6 to a maximum of 10 years, and that would assist borrowers in that repayment. CBILS term extension will be offered at the discretion of lenders, unlike pay-as-you-grow options for bounce-back loans, because they are different in terms of the guarantees that the government has offered. Extensions are limited to those borrowers that lenders assess are in difficulty and will benefit from that extension, and only for the duration required. That customised approach, I'm sure he would understand, given his vast business experience, is appropriate given the nature and scale of that different intervention.
Shall the Minister pack that for
Mr. Speaker, when Lex Greensill was given this number 10 business card, he had no contract and no job description. And there have now been reports that during the pandemic, the financial empire that he built may have lent government-backed money based on invoices to companies who'd never done business with his client GFG, and some of whom say they had no intention of doing so. Can I ask the Minister to look into this issue of how this financing was structured and to ensure that hard-working British steelworkers do not pay the price for Greensill's collapse?
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question, and I can assure him that this government is fully committed to examining all those matters through the review process and is complying with all requests for information in order to get to the bottom of this matter.
Dr. Rupert.
Number 24, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I should like to answer this question together with question number 25. The Government announced at Budget 2021 that the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme, or SAYS, will continue until September with a fourth and a final fifth grant. This provides certainty to business as the economy reopens, and it means that the SAYS will continue to be one of the most generous schemes for the self-employed in the world and one of the few where support is committed until September.
Mr. Speaker, isn't it the case that under this Chancellor, the Tories have gone from being seen as freelancer-friendly to the party of sleaze with their texts, selective texts and promises for their pounds? And if not, can they fix, it's their expression, the situation for up to 3 million who've been excluded from all of those grants that he mentioned, from universal credit, and are being forced into bankruptcy, debt, and worse, 19 self-employed suicides in the last year? What are they doing about it?
Well, the Honourable Lady will know that the SAYS is one of the most generous schemes of its kind. The range of overall measures that the government has taken is one of the most comprehensive of its kind in the world. And I think she also knows that I personally and my officials have lent in as hard as we can to understand and to work with those groups to see if we can't extend those schemes. And it hasn't been possible because of features of the design of the tax system, but we have absolutely spent every effort we can to make it so if we could.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More than 900,000 people who are self-employed, including many in the creative industry sector, who were self-employed at the start of the crisis, now say they plan to leave the sector as the crisis comes to an end. So does the Minister agree that the lack of support for the self-employed, who aren't covered by the existing schemes, risks damaging the recovery we so desperately need?
Well, a very, very large majority of the self-employed are, of course, covered by the schemes, and therefore I think the Honourable Gentleman's concern is misplaced. Of course, there will always be change in employments of different kinds, and in a dynamic economy like ours, that's to be expected. And if we can get through this desperate crisis, the worst for 300 years, with anything like any of the projected outcomes, I think that's something we can all, self-employed and no, be profoundly grateful for.
Shadow Minister James Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a recent letter to me, the Financial Secretary admitted that 710,000 freelancers who receive a portion of their income from dividends have missed out on COVID support schemes. He recognised most people are honest in their dealings with HMRC, but said concerns over fraud meant it has not been possible to support everyone in the way they might want. The government has had a year to put in place a process with adequate safeguards. Why have they given up?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question. Of course, no admission of any kind. He asked me a question. I responded comprehensively and fully to the question he put. The fact of the matter is that many of the people we're talking about have other forms of income. They may have pension income, they may have dividend income, they may have property income. And what we have tried to do is to use all of the sources of information that we have that are properly assessed and certified in order to get schemes up and running as fast as anywhere in the world. And that is an astonishing achievement. We continue to use those schemes, and we continue to work with groups around to see if others can be included.
Steve Double.
7, please. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The temporary reduced rate of VAT aims to support the cash flow and viability of around 150,000 businesses and to protect over 2.4 million jobs. As was announced at the budget, the government extended the temporary reduced rate of VAT to the 31st of March 2022 with a phased return to the standard rate. This relief alone is estimated to be worth over £7 billion to the tourism and hospitality sectors. Applying it permanently would of course come at a very significant cost to the Exchequer, and that would have then to be balanced by increased taxes elsewhere or reductions in government spending.
Mr. Speaker, the last year has clearly illustrated just how important the hospitality and tourism sectors are to not only our economy and the jobs and the businesses they support in the supply chain, but also to our overall well-being and the contribution they make to social mobility. I know as the chair of the all-party parliamentary group for hospitality and tourism just how important this cut in VAT has been in supporting these businesses. But could I ask the Minister if the Treasury would take another look at the merits of making this reduction permanent to further support this sector and the growth and jobs that it can create?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right that this has been an incredibly challenging period for the tourism and hospitality sectors. It's also right, of course, to recognise that many organisations within these sectors have benefited from the measures that I've described. Extensions to the employment schemes, business rates holidays, the VAT reduction, as well as the very important wider restart grants and the additional restrictions grant. Now, as these restrictions are lifted and demand for goods and services in these sectors resumes, temporary reliefs are being phased out and in time will be removed. Bridging that transition to a standard rate by applying a temporary 12.5% rate will help businesses to manage the change, and we should want them to get back to normal trading and support that they offer through normal trading to their communities and to the economy.
Substantive question to Minister Bett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We speak to our colleagues on a regular basis about a range of matters. The Department for Transport is in regular contact with the Treasury regarding the challenging circumstances facing the aviation sector as a result of COVID-19.
We now go across to Ruth Cadbury. Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Furlough ends in September, which is of no help to aviation and to airport communities that will take months to even partially recover as we wait for the world to unlock. Many aviation businesses are on the edge financially, and they employ staff in safety critical roles where there is a risk of skill fade if they can't be supported. They are seeking longer term support, as are communities such as ours in Hounslow, where tens of thousands of people depend on the airport for their livelihoods. So will the Treasury address the specific challenge of the aviation sector and airport communities and do this well before the furlough scheme ends in September?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. The government recognises the challenging circumstances facing the aviation industry as she's described, and they can draw on the package of measures announced by the Chancellor, not just the furlough scheme, but including schemes to raise capital, flexibilities with tax bills and employment support. The aerospace sector and its aviation customers are being supported with over £11 billion made available through loan guarantees, support for exporters and Bank of England's COVID corporate financing facility and grants for research and development. And Mr. Speaker, in addition, the renewed airport and ground operations support scheme that the Chancellor announced in his budget will provide support for eligible businesses in England with their fixed costs for a further 6 months up to the equivalent of their business rate liabilities for the first half of 2021-22.
Substantive question to the Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, stimulating private sector investment will be key to our economic recovery. The recent budget announced multiple policies to help achieve this, including free ports, the Help to Grow programme, the Future Fund Breakthrough, the Life Science Investment Partnership, consultations on reforming R&D tax credits, and of course, our radical new super deduction to support business investment as we recover from the coronavirus.
Let's go to Marcus Fish. Marcus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend and the whole Treasury team for the extensive package of support and investment incentives that we have seen over the last year. I know that businesses and employees within the Yeovil constituency are incredibly grateful for that. One other thing that's come up through the Defence Review is a very welcome focus on local prosperity within procurement decisions. I wonder if he will work with me to make sure that Leonardo and our wonderful local supply chain supplying the helicopter industry can take full advantage of that into the future.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for all the advice and support he's provided me and the team over the past year as we've sought to develop policies that will help businesses, including those like Leonardo's in his constituency, which I know he's a champion of. He's right to highlight the opportunities of better procurement, particularly for our defence supply chain, and I look forward to working with him and colleagues to make sure we can support his local businesses and many others across the United Kingdom.
Substantive question to Minister Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's put in place a number of measures to facilitate trade with the EU, including publishing comprehensive guidance on the new arrangements. HMRC have produced step-by-step guides, videos and webinars for small businesses that may be new to customs processes. The government also provided a £20 million Brexit support fund in order to assist small and medium-sized businesses in adjusting to new customs procedures, to questions of rules of origin and VAT rules when trading with the EU.
Let's go to Mohammed Yassin. Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just over a month ago, the Paymaster General told me she would follow up on my invite to the Bedfordshire Chamber of Commerce to hear the widespread concerns of businesses really struggling to overcome the new and complex operational challenges around her government's Brexit deal. I have heard nothing. So will the Minister attend a meeting with the Chamber of Commerce to hear about how customs paperwork is impacting viability, or would the Treasury also prefer to ignore the problem?
Well, I think the Paymaster General said that she's always happy to take inquiries from businesses, and I am the same. And so if he wishes to write to me, I'm perfectly happy to respond to the questions he may have.
32 withdrawn, so we come to Minister Bernouc.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has supported the steel sector extensively, including providing over £500 million in recent years to help with the cost of energy. At the summer economic update, the government announced an ambitious £3.05 billion package for housing decarbonisation designed to cut carbon, save people money and create jobs. Alongside this, our COVID support package is still available to the sector to protect jobs and to ensure that producers have the right support during this challenging time.
Let's go to Sarah Sultana. Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency is home to Liberty Pressing Solution, part of the Liberty Steel Group. The threat of the company's collapse risks losing good, skilled, unionised jobs in Coventry and across the country. This would be a disaster for the city and for British manufacturing. So rather than waiting for the company to go bust before taking action, risking workers' jobs, terms and conditions, will the government step in now with all options on the table, including bringing the business into public ownership, guaranteeing its future, and retaining the skills we need to rebuild and tackle the climate emergency?
Mr. Speaker, it would not be appropriate for me to comment on the details of individual companies due to commercial sensitivities. We are monitoring developments around Liberty and continue to engage closely with the company, broader UK steel industry and trade unions. I recognise that reports around Liberty cause worry and uncertainty to the affected work and their families. What I would say to the Honourable Lady is that there is a lot of stuff that the government is doing that will help her constituency. For instance, we are helping to create new green manufacturing jobs by providing support to drive the electrification of the UK automotive sector, supporting thousands of high-quality jobs in the West Midlands.
We now have a substantive question to Minister Bartlett.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I should like to answer this question together with question number 35. Our plan for jobs will help young people find employment opportunities, including through our youth offer and the £2 billion Kickstart scheme, where 180,000 Kickstart vacancies have already been created.
Let's go to Gordon Henderson. Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that the government is helping to create those jobs, but it's important that young people have the confidence to learn and master a skill after leaving formal education. So how will my right honourable friend ensure there are funds for people to do that in my constituency, including Sittingbourne, which is the largest town in Kent that doesn't have its own further education facilities?
Well, I agree with my honourable friend that young people should have access to the skills and training opportunities they need to access great jobs, and that is why my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has provided 126 million for traineeships in England to enable an additional 40,000 places over the next academic year, and why he has incentivised apprenticeships with up to £3,000 for employers who hire new apprenticeships of any age.
Let's go to Mark Menzies. Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Measures such as a Kickstart scheme are a fantastic way to help young people into work and reduce the risk of long-term unemployment. Many young people will have taken part-time or casual work to support themselves through the pandemic, such as in Files, hospitality and leisure sector, and may not be claiming universal credit. What steps will my right honourable friend be taking to help young people get the skills and industry experience to help them move from casual employment and launch full-time careers?
Well, my honourable friend raises an important point, and that is why, as well as the fantastic Kickstart scheme, which he points out, the Plan for Jobs also expands existing programmes with proven employment outcomes, including traineeships, sector-based work academies, and incentivised apprenticeship hiring. And also at the spending review, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, announced £138 million for the Lifetime Skills Guarantee to fund free advanced technical courses for adults without A-levels or equivalent, and to expand employer-led skills boot camps.
Substantive question to Minister Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government has provided £25 billion in cash grants for businesses, and this includes the £5 billion of funding allocated at the March budget for Restart grants and the discretionary additional restrictions grant fund. My right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, has been working closely with local authorities to ensure that these grants are delivered as swiftly as possible and directed towards the businesses that have been most impacted by the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's clear that equitable distribution of COVID business schemes is not a priority. Only this Treasury bench would have the goal to claim fairness when the Chancellor and his ministers were consumed with pulling out all the stops to support their friend, the former Prime Minister, on behalf of Greensill, whilst 3 million people were excluded from support schemes, some so distraught that they took their own lives. So to clear this up for once and for all, can he explain what news did Treasury officials report at a meeting on the 24th of April that made Greensill representatives very pleased?
As I've said previously, the Government is committed to cooperate fully with all reviews on these matters. And I don't accept what the Honourable Lady has said with respect to the schemes that this Government has put forward over the last 14 months. In her own constituency, she'll have seen 16.7 million of business grants, 1,206 bounce-back loans totalling £30 million, 12,700 of her constituents have benefited from the furlough scheme, and 2,000 have benefited from the self-employed income support scheme. I think that's a significant contribution to help her constituents.
Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Promotion or enablement of a tax avoidance scheme is not, in and of itself, a criminal offence, as we have regularly debated in this House. However, there have been numerous cases in which HMRC have made arrests or prosecuted people in relation to fraud, in particular in relation to disguised remuneration loan busting schemes.
Dr. John Lewis.
My understanding is that very few promoters of these schemes have in fact been prosecuted. And isn't it rather shocking that so many people who were missold these schemes on the basis that they were perfectly legitimate are being pursued so relentlessly, whilst the promoters are in some cases being allowed to continue their work unhindered?
Well, I think the suggestion that promoters are being allowed to do anything is quite wrong. If the honourable gentleman had looked closely at the finance bill, he would see a range of measures in this finance bill alone aimed at the promotion of tax avoidance schemes and preventing that, and aimed at disclosure of tax avoidance scheme and other measures as well. So HMRC take extremely seriously, and that's why the avoidance tax gap has fallen from £3.7 billion in 2005-06 to £1.7 billion in 2018-19. That is an over 50% fall.
Mr. Matheson.
Topic number 1, please, sir.
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, this government has supported our economy through coronavirus with over £350 billion to protect jobs, families and businesses. And as we approach the next phase of our roadmap out of lockdown, our support continues to ensure that we emerge from this pandemic stronger and more united.
Matheson.
Speaker, the Financial Conduct Authority has asked John Swift QC to investigate the mis-selling of certain business loans to small businesses, but also their response to complaints about that mis-selling. The review has refused to take into account any loans that were settled with non-disclosure agreements between the business and the banks, giving a skewed view and a skewed outcome. Will the Chancellor speak to the FCA and ask John Swift to ensure that all evidence is taken into account so that we can get a proper view of the FCA's dealings?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, which is on an important matter. And like I say, I welcome the conclusions of the Swift review, and I hope the honourable gentleman can appreciate that it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment or intervene on the scope of the review, as it was set up to be completely independent of government. That said, I can say to the honourable gentleman, we've always been very clear that the mis-selling of interest rate hedging products is wrong, and nothing that the redress scheme does means that businesses can't still go either to the FCA or the Financial Ombudsman Service if they, or indeed the courts actually, if they wish. But if there are particular circumstances the honourable gentleman wishes to raise with either the FCA or indeed with the Swift review, he's able to do that directly.
Let's go to Sally Ann Hart. Sally Ann.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Brexit is a great opportunity to turbocharge global Britain, but unfortunately it has not worked so far for the fishermen in my constituency of beautiful Hastings and Rye. Had it not been for Mr. Keith Chapman setting up an export hub in Rye for local fishermen, many might not have survived. He did this at his own expense and has not been eligible for any government funding made available to the fishing industry. Can I ask my right honourable friend what further support can be given to assist entrepreneurs like Mr. Chapman when exports are hit by the double whammy of COVID and Brexit?
Well, Mr. Speaker, fishing is at the heart of many of our coastal communities, and I pay tribute to Mr. Chapman and indeed my honourable friend for their commitment to the sector. I am happy to say that the government is also championing and committed to the sector. We have announced £100 million of a fund to modernise our fleets and infrastructure, and that's on top of £32 million that will place the EU funding this year and £23 million that was made available earlier to support the sector whilst adjusting to the new export requirements.
Chancellor
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A year ago, the Chancellor personally announced the CL Bill scheme, or our loan scheme for large companies, as his department put it. Allowing Greensill Capital access to that scheme put hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money and thousands of jobs at risk. The Prime Minister said he'd publish every personal exchange related to COVID contracts. Has the Chancellor published his every communication relating to government business on Greensill, including with David Cameron? Yes or no?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have actually responded to all the requests that I've been asked, and indeed gone above and beyond in providing disclosure. I would say a couple of things to the honourable lady. I think, first of all, I'm very happy to cooperate fully and constructively with both the Independent Boardman Review and indeed the Treasury Select Committee inquiry, and that those processes have begun. I think secondly, on the substance, Mr. Speaker, it's important to remember what was going on. We were in the midst of a financial crisis, and indeed we were keen to explore all avenues to support small and medium-sized businesses, which we've heard in the House today that there are still challenges. So it was right to examine all avenues to do that. This was just one of many strands of work that the Treasury and I conducted rightly and appropriately. But in the end, Mr. Speaker, it was important to notice that we rejected, in the end, to take forward any proposals on supply chain finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll take that as a no. It appears the Chancellor is less committed to transparency than the Prime Minister himself. That's not what I'd call levelling with the British public. Let's see if he can level on another significant government failure, the delay to imposing restrictions last autumn, which cost lives and our economy dear. In late October, when I asked the Chancellor if he was blocking a circuit breaker, he said, and I quote, "I agree with the Prime Minister." Now it's being suggested he sided with others against the Prime Minister. Now, we've grown used to the Chancellor chopping and changing his mind, but can he explain, was this change of heart driven by science and the needs of our economy, or the internal politics of the Conservative Party?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady is confusing multiple things. And she's asked me previously about circuit breakers, and at the time there was a debate, appropriately, about whether a national intervention was right at a time when the epidemiology across this country was incredibly varied. That is something that the Deputy Chief Medical Officer himself spoke about at a press conference and said it would be inappropriate at that time to take forward national interventions, and that was what I was referring to. And Mr. Speaker, just to go back to the Shadow Chancellor's previous comment about transparency, in fact, I voluntarily published extra messages to aid people's transparency of this process, fully committed to working constructively with the inquiry, both the Board and Review and the Treasury Select Committee inquiry. And it is worth pointing out, Mr. Speaker, if I just remind the Shadow Chancellor of something she herself said last April, writing in the Mirror, where she said the CBILS loan scheme seems to be stuck in the banks and not getting to small businesses in particular, where cash flow is desperately needed. Well, Mr. Speaker, the government was also looking at how to get cash flow to small businesses, and I am sad and disappointed about what a conveniently short memory she has.
Right, let's go to Ian Little-Granger. Ian.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, and thank you. I wonder if the Chancellor would order an investigation into the management of contracts between Skanska and Somerset County Council. There is evidence emerging of lazy council practices which are costing millions and millions of pounds in overpayment. We need to get to the bottom of this, and we can't get the local county council to do it. Would the Chancellor please not only investigate, but suggest how we as MPs can force the issue before we have a complete disaster on our hands?
Chancellor.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in my previous job as Minister for Local Government, I enjoyed many conversations with my honourable friend about local government matters, and he will know it's not for the Chancellor or indeed national government to implement the redress processes. There are established redress processes which I'd be happy to write to him about for him to seek redress for his particular concerns.
6 withdrawn. Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we emerge from the coronavirus crisis, our high streets need more support to survive than ever before, especially in former industrial areas in Rother Valley, such as Diddington, Maltby, Swallownest, Kiverton and others. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the Levelling Up Fund presents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to inject much-needed investment into our beleaguered high streets, both in Rother Valley and across all our nations, returning them to a former glory, and does agree with me that our RMBC, Rotherham Council, should put in a good, strong bid to get this money for our high streets?
Well, I do agree with my honourable friend. The government is committed to levelling up opportunities across the UK, including in Rother Valley, and the £4.8 billion Levelling Up Fund will invest in infrastructure that improves everyday life across the UK, including regenerating town centres, high streets, upgrading local transport and investing in cultural and heritage assets. And I look forward to working with him in terms of his local area.
Let's go to Alex Cunningham. Alex.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Will he guarantee the future of the steel industry in Hartlepool? Anybody will do.
Just waiting.
Mr. Speaker, as I said in earlier questions on this issue, the government is providing unprecedented support to the steel industry. If he has something specific about the steel industry in Hartlepool, I'm very happy for him to write to me and I will look at the issues. But I have already answered this question and talked about the various measures of support that are in place.
Let's go to Bob Blackman. Bob.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the 31st of January, in answering the debate on justice for equitable life policyholders, this House was assured that all records were being retained and would be available in the event of them being needed. Equally, we were assured that there was no plans to actually destroy those records. I was therefore shocked that the Public Accounts Committee, in their hearing last week, was informed by Treasury officials that the records had been destroyed and would not be available. This makes actually getting justice for equitable life policyholders more expensive. So will my right honourable friend agree to meet me and a small delegation of the all-party parliamentary group, so we can get to the bottom of how we can move this long-running saga forward.
There's been no change in the Treasury's position since I updated the House in January 2019. The relevant records, that is, the data relating to all payments made under the scheme, are retained and will continue to be so for as long as that's legal. Contrary to the press reports, there are no plans to destroy records. The complaints process provided by the scheme, and those that were not satisfied could take their case to the independent review panel, which resolves such cases before closure. Further to the oral evidence session that the Honourable Gentleman made reference to, the Permanent Secretary of the Treasury will be writing to the Public Accounts Committee to provide similar reassurance and clarification. Since the scheme is now closed, there will be no further funding on this matter.
Let's go to Sarah Aldey. Sarah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Association of Accounting Technicians have published their response to the consultation opened by the Treasury on their plans to reduce air passenger duty. And in it, they argue that a reduction would be wrong, as it contradicts and greatly weakens government policy on seeking to reach net zero by 2050. Why does the government's tax policy not support its net zero goals?
Minister.
I'm not sure exactly what reduction in air passenger duty the Honourable Lady is referring to. We are actually increasing air passenger duty in this year's finance bill.
Let's go to Andrew Bridgen. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A band C home in Colville in my constituency has a higher council tax charge than a band H property in Westminster. The Chancellor, in his former position as a minister in DCLG, told the House that the Leicestershire Fairer funding model had a lot to commend it and would be used in consultation. Given that this is 3 years ago, would he look at an updated report by Leicestershire County Council entitled Putting Right the Years of Wrong?
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, I'll be very happy to look at the report to which he refers, and he'll know that addressing future local authority resourcing is a matter for future spending reviews in the local government finance settlement. But I would remind him that at the spending review 20, we provided an estimated 4.6% cash increase in core spending to the local authorities. That's on top of the largest real terms increase in their core spending at the spending review in 2019, and that is in additional to the around £11 billion of support that has been provided as part of the COVID response.
Let's go to Afzal Khan. Afzal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That the Prime Minister said he would rather see the bodies piled high than enter another lockdown is utterly despicable. My mother and parents-in-laws were not bodies. They were my family, my loved ones. Grieving families like mine deserve better. We deserve a place to remember those we have lost. That's why the covered memorial wall is so important. So has the Chancellor estimated how much it would cost to make this wall of hearts permanent? And if not, will he now do so?
Chancellor.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry for the honourable gentleman's loss, and I know the whole House would join me in passing on those condolences. I'm not aware of the particular proposal that he mentioned, but if he would write to me, I would be happy to take a look at it.
Mr. Speaker, the government's commitment to TCFD highlights the importance of transparency in investment portfolios. Does my honourable friend agree that more can be done to improve transparency and prevent exposure of investments by financial services companies to modern slavery?
Yes. I agree with the honourable gentleman on modern slavery. Landmark provision in section 54 of the 2015 Act includes institutional investors who fall within scope of the requirement and meet the criteria requiring them to publish an annual statement.
Let's go to Patricia Gibson. Patricia.
Mr. Speaker, with the Prime Minister apparently determined to keep the VIP tax break hotline open, and as questions remain over the number 10 refurbishment, as well as concerns over government procurement still not addressed, can the Chancellor explain whether or not he thinks it's time for an independent inquiry into misuse of public funds?
Chancellor.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has appointed Nigel Bourman to conduct an independent review of these various matters. And with regard to COVID in general, the Prime Minister has also said at the appropriate time there will be all the necessary lessons to be learned.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
One of my constituents who is self-employed has received no government support in the past year. Unlike others, they didn't have the Chancellor's number to raise issues with him, so I wrote to him on their behalf. In a response I received this month, the Department acknowledged that there are people that have missed out on support because of what they call practical reasons. So what urgent steps is the Chancellor taking to fix a system that is leaving many self-employed people facing destitution?
Well, I thank the Honourable for his question. I think he'll know we've covered this quite extensively in this debate so far. The self-employed scheme is a very wide-ranging and comprehensive scheme. We have worked very closely with groups, and I have met personally with many groups representing those who believe they've been excluded from the schemes. We've tried everything we can to try to incorporate them. We continue to engage with them, and we take the issue very seriously.
Tom Randall, final question.
Mr Speaker, the Borough of Gedling has received over £105,000 welcome back funding to help high streets reopen safely and successfully as restrictions lift, and I'll be out visiting businesses in Gedling on Friday to encourage them to apply for restart grants. Would my right honourable friend join me in not only welcoming these lifelines for businesses, but encouraging businesses to apply for all the help available so that they can get back on their feet as we start to get back to normal?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I salute the people of Carlton. I rejoice in the businesses of Mapperley, and I encourage businesses across the constituency of Gedling to take advantage of the government's unprecedented package of support, including the £5 billion worth of grant support the Chancellor's announced at budget, which is providing a lifeline for businesses as they relaunch their trading safely.
I now suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable necessary arrangements to be made for the next business order. Are you ready? John, you ready to go? Order! I now call Tulip Siddiq to ask an urgent question. Tulip Siddiq.
To ask the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Affairs if he will make a statement on Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Iran's decision to sentence Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe on further charges is totally inhumane and wholly unjustified. This government remains committed to doing all that we can to secure Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe's return home to the United Kingdom so that she can be reunited with her daughter Gabriella and her husband Richard. It is indefensible and it is unacceptable that Iran has chosen to continue this wholly arbitrary court case against Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe. The Iranian government has deliberately put her through a cruel and inhumane ordeal. We continue to call on Iran in the strongest possible terms to end her suffering and allow her to return home. Mr. Speaker, since her arrest in April 2016, Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe has faced terrible hardship and appalling treatment. This government has relentlessly lobbied for an improvement to the conditions endured both by Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe while she was in prison and those conditions still experienced by others, including Morad Tabez and Anousheh Ashuri, who are still incarcerated. Although Iran does not recognise dual nationality and therefore only views Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe as an Iranian citizen, that has not stopped this government from lobbying at every opportunity for their release and her return home to the UK. We have never been granted sight of the judicial process or consular access to our dual British nationals detained in Iran. However, that has not stopped our ambassador in Tehran consistently pressing for her full and permanent release with senior Iranian interlocutors, most recently today on the 27th of April. Since I was last at the dispatch box, the Foreign Secretary and the FCDO officials have been in regular contact with Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe and her family. Our ambassador in Tehran has visited Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe at her parents' home in Tehran to reiterate the government's commitment to do all that we can to secure her return to the UK. The Foreign Secretary has spoken both with Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe and her husband to underline the UK government, from the Prime Minister down, to underline the fact that we remain committed to doing everything we can to achieve that. Since Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe's arrest in 2016, we have raised this case regularly at the highest levels of government. The Prime Minister has raised it with President Rouhani, most recently on the 10th of March, and the Foreign Secretary personal ongoing engagement with Foreign Minister Zarif continues, with their most recent call being on the 3rd of April. This lobbying of Iranian interlocutors at every opportunity has helped to secure the release of Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe on furlough on March 2020 and the removal of her ankle tag on the 7th of March this year. But as I have said, what we ultimately seek to achieve and what we are ultimately working towards is the release of all British dual nationals held in arbitrary detention in Iran and their ability to return home. The UK continues to take concrete steps to hold Iran to account for its poor human rights record. At the Human Rights Council in March 2021, we strongly supported the renewal mandate of the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran. And we made clear to Iran that their repeated violations of human rights, including those of foreign and dual nationals, are completely unacceptable. The UK government also joined the Canadian initiative against arbitrary detention on 15th of February. We continue to work with G7 partners to enhance mechanisms to uphold international law, tackle human rights abuses and stand up for our shared values. Mr Speaker, to conclude, please may I assure the House that the safety and the treatment of dual British national detainees in Iran remains a top priority for the UK government. Iran is the one responsible for putting Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe through this cruel and inhumane ordeal over the last 5 years, and it remains on them to release her, to be reunited with her family, and to release the others. We continue to stress these second charges are baseless. She must not be returned to prison.
Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, very much for granting this urgent question. The whole House will be aware that Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, my constituent, has been in prison in Iran for 5 years now, and from last March she's been under house arrest. The Iranian authorities dangled the possibility of freedom in front of her by removing her ankle tag, but then yesterday announced that she had 1 more year in prison and that she had another year of travel ban, effectively a 2-year sentence. Mr Speaker, as the news unfolded yesterday, I watched with great interest as the Prime Minister talked about redoubling his efforts to get Nazanin home and how he was working as hard as he possibly could to secure her release. If the Prime Minister is watching now, I would like to ask him what efforts has he put into trying to release Nazanin in the first place, because from where I'm standing, I've seen no evidence on part of the Prime Minister so far. At the heart of this tragic case is the Prime Minister's dismal failure to release my constituent and to stand up for her, and his devastating blunder in 2017 when he was Foreign Secretary, when he exposed his complete ignorance of this tragic case and put more harm in Nazanin's way. The Prime Minister did not even arrange UK officials to attend Nazanin's recent court hearing, which might have ensured that she got a free and fair trial. He still hasn't got his government to pay the £400 million debt that we as a country owe Iran. And Mr. Speaker, we MPs might be many things, but we are not naive. We cannot deny the fact that Nazanin was handed a fresh new sentence a week after the IMS debt court hearing was delayed. Bearing this in mind, I'd like to ask the Minister a few questions, and I would really appreciate some proper answers from him. Will the Minister acknowledge that Nazanin is being held hostage by Iran and is a victim of torture? In light of the recent adjournment of the IMS debt hearing scheduled for last week, what is the government doing to ensure the debt is paid promptly? The Prime Minister said yesterday he was working with our American friends on this issue. Can the Minister please explain what this involves and why the US has had more success in securing the release of dual nationals than we have? And tomorrow, another British-Iranian dual national, Mehran Rauf, is on trial in Iran. What link does the Minister see between development in this and Nazanin's case and upcoming talks on the Iran nuclear deal? Perhaps the Prime Minister and the ministers opposite won't listen to me, but perhaps they'll listen to someone from their own benches. The chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee said today that Nazanin is being held hostage by Iran. Please, Minister, please, to everyone from the opposite benches, get Nazanin released, stand up to Iran and bring my constituent home.
Mr. Speaker, I completely understand the passion with which the Honourable Lady speaks, and I can hear the anger and frustration in her voice. However, her anger and frustration is misdirected because Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and the other British dual nationals held in arbitrary detention are being held by Iran. It is on them. The situation with regard to the charges that have been recently brought against other British dual nationals, and indeed the sentence that has been brought down for Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe, are because of Iran. And it should be towards Iran that we direct our attention. With regard to Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe's treatment, our priority has always been her full release and her ability to return home to the UK. The UK does not and will never accept our dual nationals being used as diplomatic leverage. And we recognise that her treatment has been completely unacceptable. It is totally inhumane and wholly unjustified. And we call upon Iran to allow Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe to return home to the UK and to release from detention all British dual nationals that are being held. She speaks about international cooperation. Of course, we cooperate with our international partners on a whole range of issues with regard to Iran, including the United States of America, including E3, and as I've already said, we're working with Canada on the work that they're doing for the initiative against arbitrary detention. We will continue to focus our efforts on getting Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe home to the UK and the other dual nationals in detention fully released.
Let's go to the Chair of the Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat. Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much for agreeing to the Honourable Member for Kilburn's request for an urgent question here. It's absolutely essential that we keep focus on this cruel and inhumane treatment of a mother held captive as a hostage, as a pawn, in order to ransom money out of others and to extract diplomatic leverage. But let's keep that focus where it really belongs, on this brutal and tyrannical regime in Tehran that treats its own people as hostages and as pawns. And as we focus on that, can we please focus on why they're doing it? They're doing it for personal profit. They're doing it for violence in the region. They're doing it in order to mask their crimes. Perhaps the Minister can tell us what sanctions are going to be brought against the Iranian Revolutionary Guard that has so profited from this violent regime. And now that corruption is permitted as a use for the Magnitsky sanctions, how that is going to be used to make sure that this regime's pockets are emptied and not filled.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, the Chairman of the Select Committee, is absolutely right that the blame lies with the Iranian regime. Not even with the Iranian people, but with the Iranian regime. He will understand that I'm not willing to discuss future sanctions designations for fear that that might be prejudicial to any future success. We do, of course, recognise that Iran's behaviour is unacceptable in a number of ways, not just in the detention of British dual nationals, but with regard to their international and regional actions. And we call upon Iran to step away from this route, this dangerous and self-destructive route that they have taken, rejoin the international community, and be a regional partner that behaves in accordance with the international rules and norms.
Let's go to Shadow Minister Wayne David. Wayne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After having completed a 5-year sentence, for Nazanin to be given a further 1-year sentence and a travel ban is truly appalling news. Let us be clear. Nazanin was put on trial on a trumped-up charge of promoting, quote, propaganda against the system and found guilty after a sham trial. Sadly, we are seeing a sustained failure of British diplomacy. Now the government must demand in the strongest possible terms Nazanin's release immediately and unconditionally so that Nazanin can return to Britain and be with her family. As the UN Special Rapporteur has said, it is totally unacceptable that Iran is imprisoning UK nationals, Nazanin and others, in an attempt to exert diplomatic leverage. Let us not forget that there are other British nationals who are being unfairly imprisoned in Iran as well. Anusha Ashuri has been held for 3.5 years and says that the UK government is not doing enough to secure his release. My question to the Minister is this. Clearly, its approach to date has not worked. What is the government now doing to secure the release of Nazanin and the others so that they can all come home?
Mr. Speaker, the government works on behalf of all the British dual nationals, whether they be held in detention, in prison or elsewhere, and indeed for Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe so that she can come home. The UK has had some positive impact. For example, Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe's release on furlough and the removal of her ankle tag were in response to lobbying by this government. We want to do more. We want to ensure that the people who are held in detention are released and are all able to return home to their families, and we will continue to work hard at every level of government to ensure that happens.
Let's go to Bob Blackburn. Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate the honourable member for Hampstead and Kilburn in securing this question and ensuring that it's at the forefront of this House's mind about the family of Nazanin and also herself in prison. Iran has a dreadful human rights record with the largest number of executions anywhere in the world and indeed oppression of its native people. Does my honourable friend not find it ironic then that the United Nations Economic and Social Council elected Iran to the Commission on the Status of Women for a full 4-year term? And will he therefore take up this at the United Nations to say it's totally unacceptable for a country that suppresses women and imprisons women without proper process to be even considered to be in representing human rights across the world?
The UK government takes the rights of women very seriously indeed, and indeed one of the priorities as set out for our ODA expenditure is girls' education. The election of countries to various roles in the United Nations is ultimately a decision for that multilateral forum, but understand the concerns that he has raised about Iran's treatment of women. We call upon Iran to do the right thing. We will continue to lobby, as I say, both for the release and return of British dual nationals and also on a whole range of other issues where we believe Iran's behaviour is unacceptable.
Let's go to SNP spokesperson Chris Law. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The SNP's condemnation of the Iranian government for the painfully outrageous detention of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe is unequivocal. Iran has never followed the rule of law on Nazanin's case, and she's never received a fair trial. Their cruelty, it seems, is boundless. The precise nature of the charges and evidence in the second case remain unclear and indistinct from the first case. Therefore, what clarification has the UK government sought on the detail of these charges and whether Nazanin will be returned to prison or will be under house arrest as a result of this new sentence? Furthermore, it is easy to forget that Nazanin's case is yet another matter the Prime Minister has blundered into and made much worse due to his grossly incompetent mishandling while Foreign Secretary. He cannot continue to wash his hands of this case. Will the Prime Minister therefore be making an apology on record to Nazanin and her family, and will the Foreign and Development Office now do all it can with the utmost urgency to undo the damage the Prime Minister has done to secure Nazanin's release?
Mr. Speaker, what we have seen in recent days is the completely arbitrary nature of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's detention and the detention of other British dual nationals in Iran. This is the action of the Iranian regime, and we should not let them off the hook by attempting to divert attention elsewhere. It is down to the Iranian regime. We will continue to work to secure the release of those incarcerated and the return home of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. We are seeking detail because the detail was quite sparse initially. We are seeking further detail on what exactly this means, and we're lobbying in the first instance that Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe is not returned to prison, and we will continue to push for her return home to the UK and for the full and permanent release of the others that are detained.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Iran has proudly announced that it is now enriching uranium to 60% purity, a move that puts the country perilously near the threshold for weapons-grade uranium. Given this latest provocative nuclear action, Tehran's ongoing support for terror proxies and indeed their detention of British citizens, including Ms Zaghari-Ratcliffe, does the Minister share my view that it would be dangerous to ease sanctions on Iran?
Minister.
My honourable friend makes an important point about Iran's broader destabilising actions. I won't speculate as to future decisions about sanctions for the reason I gave to the chair of the Select Committee, but we are very conscious that Iran's behaviour on a number of fronts is unacceptable. They should return to compliance with the JCPOA, and that is what we're calling upon them to do.
Let's go to Layla Moran. Layla.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Liberal Democrats join colleagues across the House in the condemnation of the actions of the Iranian regime. But of course, our heart has to go out to Richard, to Gabriella, the whole family. This must feel like one step forward, two steps back. And I sincerely hope that this government is considering Magnitsky sanctions, because surely that's the next step now. But what I'm concerned about is Nazanin's current state. Redress write that Nazanin has already suffered severe physical and psychological impacts from torture and ill treatment, and that if she is subjected to more of that, it could cause irreparable damage to her. So I ask the Secretary of State, what immediate attention has our government put on the Iranian regime to ensuring that Nazanin's medical needs are met in full?
Mr. Speaker, we're very conscious of the health situation of all those detained, particularly in light of the COVID situation. We lobby the Iranian government hard and regularly for to ensure that British dual nationals held in detention have got adequate medical treatment, and we will continue to push ultimately for the thing that we're all trying to achieve, which is for their full release and their ability to return to the UK.
Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the honourable member for Hampstead and Kilburn for securing this question and her tenacious campaigning for Nazanin. And also thank the Minister for mentioning Anousheh Ashuri and Murad Tabaz, the other dual nationals, because they too have families desperately upset by the situation and the incarceration of their loved ones. But I want to ask the Minister, what are the consequences going to be for Iran of this hostage diplomacy other than words? Because we know they don't fundamentally care what we think or what we say, and they have to know that there will be consequences. We have to do our part by settling this IMS issue, which, however unjustified, is being linked to Nazanin's incarceration, and that's taking a very long time. But ultimately, what are the consequences going to be for Iran of continuing with hostage diplomacy? Because otherwise, it's all bark and no bite.
I thank my right honourable friend for making reinforcing the point that, of course, as well as Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, there are other British dual nationals in incarceration, and the UK government works tirelessly to secure all their releases, those people who are, some of whom household names, others who are less well known, but we work on behalf of all of them. I can assure him that we will continue to lobby, as we have done, to try and secure all their releases, and I can assure him that we will investigate the full range of options. But as I said before, it would be inappropriate for me to speculate at the dispatch box as to what those might be.
Let's go to Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I compliment the member for Hampstead and Kilburn on her tireless work on behalf of her constituent and, of course, on behalf of other dual nationals that are held in Iran. It is disgraceful that they're still held. It's disgraceful that Nazanin has had another sentence put on her and she ought to be released. Could I ask the Minister, in the many negotiations that are no doubt being taking place with the Iranian government, what other issues are raised by Iran? Is the issue of financial dealings between Britain and Iran in the past raised? And what other discussions does he propose to have with Iran in order to secure the early release of all of the dual nationals?
Mr. Speaker, the UK does not and will never accept dual nationals being used for political leverage. And therefore, I'm not going to amplify whatever claims the Iranian regime have made about them. Our message, and the message that I would hope he and every other member of this House would echo, is that the Iranian regime must release our people.
Steve Becker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my honourable friend will know, in 2019 the Foreign Secretary visited Iran, where he raised the case of Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe with Foreign Minister Zarif. Since then, what other discussions has the Foreign Secretary had with the Minister to try and resolve this? And is any progress being made in each of these communications?
I thank my honourable friend for the question. We do, as I've said, we do engage regularly and at the most senior levels with the Iranian government. We've had diplomatic engagement, as I say, to secure Nazanin's initial furlough and the removal of the ankle tag. Our ambassador visited Nazanin at her home last week. We raised the case regularly. As I say, the Prime Minister raised it in his recent call with President Rouhani, and the Foreign Secretary with his call to Foreign Minister Zarif. And the British Ambassador to Tehran, our Ambassador to Tehran, has formally protested Nazanin's continued confinement. We will raise this on every occasion where we have an opportunity to speak with the Iranian regime. We will raise this. We will continue to push this until all our British dual nationals are released and allowed to return home.
On the Anthony.
Mr. Speaker, last year Richard Radcliffe, Nazanin's husband, said he feared that if she was not home for Christmas, there's every chance this could run for years. Was he right, Minister?
I sincerely hope that he is not right, and we will continue to work to bring Nazanin home and for the release of all British dual nationals. Their incarceration is unacceptable, it is unjustified, it is arbitrary, and it must stop.
Thank
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are strongest when we work together with our international partners. I understand that several Western countries have citizens who are dual nationals who are suffering a similar dreadful fate to Nazanin. Can my right honourable friend update the House as to what discussions he has had with our Western allies as to how we can work together for the release of our citizens?
I thank my honourable friend for the point she raises about the international nature of this. And of course, we work closely with international partners, as I've said, with the E3 and the United States of America in particular with regard to our policy towards Iran. We will work with any and all international friends and partners in order to bring pressure to bear for the release of their and our dual nationals in detention. As I say, the challenge is that Iran does not recognise dual national status and therefore denies us a number of the consular access opportunities that we would normally have, but we will continue working to secure the release of our British dual nationals in Iran.
My friend the member for Hampstead and Kilburn for this urgent question and all she does to champion Nazanin's case and to get her home to her family. And it's a shame the Foreign Secretary isn't here today to answer the questions himself. In Newport West, the case is personal because Richard Ratcliffe's sister is a constituent of mine, so I was determined to speak today. And the question is, the United Nations has previously ruled that Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's imprisonment is unlawful and ordered Iran to release her. So what is this government doing to work through the international community to put pressure on Iran to follow their international obligations?
I thank the honourable lady for the point that she has raised, and as I've said in response to the previous question, we do work and we will continue to work with our international friends and partners on a range of issues with regards to Iran and their destabilising behaviour both globally and in the region, and we will continue to do so.
Is it the view of Her Majesty's government, or indeed of any previous government, that we do or do not owe any money to Iran?
The legal situation with the IMS debt has been settled. It's a multi-decade long problem, and we are investigating ways by which this can be resolved.
Let's go to Alison Thewlis. Alison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Sarah McCulloch is one of many who've been in touch over the years to express their concerns and solidarity with Nazanin and her family. Her continued detention is a mark of failure of this government. So this minister and his predecessors, what confidence can British citizens have in the ability of this UK government to protect them abroad?
Mr. Speaker, the situation of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and the other British dual nationals held in detention is the fault of the Iranian regime. We must never lose sight of that. They have the power to release them, they should release them, and we regularly call upon them to do so and allow them to return to the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom gives travel advice to help inform British travellers when they go overseas, and of course we have an extensive network to give support to British travellers. We absolutely do everything we can to protect our British nationals when they are overseas, and when they find themselves in a situation as the British dual nationals in Iran have found themselves, we work tirelessly in all respects, in all cases, to support them.
Mr. Speaker, I know that the member for Hampstead and Kilburn looks forward to the day she does not have to bring this case to the House, and we are with her on that. Nazanin has an extra year in prison and another year not being able to be at home with her family. Now, as the Minister said, this is both inhumane and unjustified, and this is squarely at the feet of the Iranian regime. But was the Minister surprised, as I was, when the United Nations, within its wisdom, elected Iran to the Commission on the Status of Women? It shows a couple of things, not just one about the United Nations, but also that Iran wants to have credibility on the international stage. So can the Minister impress on the United Nations that one way for Iran to hold this position is to allow Nazanin and other dual nationals home?
My honourable friend, my dear honourable friend, makes an incredibly important point. If Iran wants to be taken seriously on the international stage, if it wants to speak with authority on the international stage, it must change its behaviours on a whole range of issues, but most notably with regard to the release of the British dual nationals held in incarceration and their ability to return home to the United Kingdom.
Jim Shall.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Minister for his update, and he also shares we all share the same frustration, and that goes without saying. To say the situation is distressing is a gross understatement, and whilst I understand the issues highlighted, it is my opinion that something must be done to reunite this mother with her child, her husband and family. I ask the Minister, is there nothing that can legally be done by the UK Government in conjunction with other governments, USA, the EU, with the UN, to stop the persecution of this British citizen and the desecration of this British family?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right that this whole House shares frustration of the situation that these people find themselves in through no fault of their own. We will continue to work, as I say, with international partners on a whole range of issues with regard to Iran. We will continue to lobby Iran to change their behaviours, to come back into the international fold. And one of the most high-profile and perhaps one of the easiest things that they could do is to release these people and allow them to return home.
Let's go to Simon Joe. Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's decision to grant Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe diplomatic protection to help her resolve her case. This is the first time this tool has been used in recent memory. Can my right honourable friend update the House on what further steps the UK are taking to help secure Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's release?
I thank my honourable friend for the point he made about the granting of diplomatic status. It sends a signal to Iran of how seriously we take the issue of our British dual nationals. And this government remains committed to doing everything we can to secure the full permanent release of all dual nationals, including the return home of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. We constantly review what further steps we might take, and as I said, not something I'm willing to speculate about at the dispatch box, to secure the release of all our British dual nationals and allow them to return home.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, like many other Brits abroad, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been completely let down by this government through a litany of errors, including the Prime Minister's gaffe. Nazanin and her family will doubtless be experiencing serious mental health pressures and anguish at this point in time. Indeed, her husband, Richard Ratcliffe, has previously stated that the government's inability to secure his wife's return is, and I quote, a failure of diplomacy. Would the Minister agree? Doesn't this further sentence prove that he is right?
Sadly, what this, I think, sentence proves is that Iran is willing to do anything to attempt to apply diplomatic leverage using British dual nationals as the tool of doing so. We will never accept that. We will continue to lobby for all the releases, for the release of all the British dual nationals. And as I say, the fault sits wholly, squarely with Iran.
Speaker, I join with other colleagues from across this House in our condemnation of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's further imprisonment. Could I press my right honourable friend a little bit further on Iran's election to the Commission on the Status of Women? This isn't just an empty title. It confers status and it suggests a commitment to gender equality that Iran does not have. Could we not use our position on the UN Security Council in conjunction with allies to consider our own participation with the Commission for as long as Iran remains a member?
My honourable friend makes an incredibly important point. The various functions within the United Nations are separate to each other. However, she does raise a broader point about Iran's about the treatment and status of women in Iran. This is something we take incredibly seriously. We will continue to lobby for improvements for the status of women both in Iran and globally as part of our Force for Good agenda.
Final question from Janet Davey. Janet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The news that Nazanin will be forced to spend another 2 years in Iran far from her family is completely devastating. Anousheh Ashori, also being held in Tehran in prison as a hostage, is dearly missed by his family in my constituency in Lewisham East. Over the past few days, his family are concerned that he is showing severe signs of coronavirus. What urgent action will the Foreign Secretary take this week to ensure Anousheh gets the medical furlough he desperately needs?
I thank the honourable lady for the point that she's raised and the work that I know she has done in support of her constituent. We are aware, we've been in contact and we are aware of the concerns about the medical situation in the prison. We have pushed the Iranian regime to allow access of medical professionals for as I say, for Mr. Shuri, and we will continue to push for the better treatment of our British dual nationals whilst they are incarcerated, but ultimately for their release and their ability to return home.
Suspend the House for 2 minutes to enable necessary arrangements to be made for the next business. Order.